just to remind you, I actually lived in Israel I'm originally a Montrealer, like Jeffrey also. Although I did not know Jeffrey in Montreal, only because he's so much older than I am.
But I did date girls who went to her high school.
Yes, he did. And I lived in Israel for 18 years. And when I moved to Boston about 13 years ago, and I was trying to figure out what to do with my professional life, because I come from the world of music, I come from the music industry.
We're going to talk a little about that, too.
I was doing a lot of research on the different I'm very passionate about Israel, and this is leading into what JNF does. And I started doing a lot of research, because friends of mine were saying to me, you're so passionate about Israel, why not do something for Israel? And I didn't really understand what that meant. I have the most incredible parents. My dad was an Israeli, so he instilled a love of Israel for me, but he was a used car dealer in Montreal. I didn't grow up with any money, so I wasn't familiar with the world of charity. And I started doing a lot of research and figuring out there's all these incredible initials that I didn't know what they meant, you know, the ADLs, the APACs, the CJPs, and so forth, and JNF. And even though I lived there for so many years, you know, unless you're involved, you don't really know what organizations do. So JNF absolutely turned me on in every way. I immediately became a donor. And the reason I loved it so much is because as an Israeli, and I consider myself Israeli today, JNF does more for our brothers and sisters in Israel than any other organization. And what we really do is first of all, we're an environmental organization. Most people know us for planting trees. Whether you're Jewish or not, people plant trees in Israel in memory, in honor, and so forth of individuals. And we've planted to date over 250 million trees.
Wow. Only country in the world that's greener today than it was 100 years ago.
Correct.
That's a lot of trees.
Correct. Over the years, we've evolved, and we are we're not a government agency, we're not a religious organization, nor are we a political organization. So no matter what your political beliefs are, whether you're religious or secular or so forth, the reason I find that JNF is very empowering is because we're really just all about making a better life for the Israeli people. So we're involved in many different aspects of day-to-day living, and I like to separate into three things. Number one, it's the water issues in Israel. For those of you who don't know, Israel is under a terrible crisis of a drought in Israel, which affects not only Israel, but our Arab neighbors, the whole Middle East. And we are very involved in alleviating the water crisis. And it's an absolute fascinating projects that we're involved in. All over the country, we've built over 220 reservoirs to date, which is actually supplying a lot of water. We only have one sweet water lake in Israel. It's the Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Kinneret. And we are also the #1 country. This is an interesting statistic that I would never have known had I not worked for JNF. Israel recycles over 75% of its water. The second country in the world is Spain. They recycle 18%. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. So JNF is very involved in recycling. We fund a lot of the R&D, research and development centers in Israel. As I said, we're building the reservoirs. We have a lot of very excellent technology. And we also share our technology with our Arab neighbors. You know, and there are even people who say to me, you're helping the Arab neighbors, and what I try to explain is we're humanitarians. I mean, for example, the Palestinians have horrible sewage problems, and we have what's called wetland technology, which can help solve these sewage problems. So yes, we are helping the Palestinians, the Arabs who live in Israel in the villages, and by helping, you know, create a healthier environment for their children, it's also creating a healthier environment for our children. So water is one of the main things that we're involved in. Of course, we wouldn't be an organization if it wasn't all about the future, which means the children of Israel. And we're very involved in the future and the children and the young leadership in Israel. So we fund one of...
You move so fast, Sharon. I think, you know, for a listener, you don't capture all those things. You know, Rick,
there's a lot to absorb.
There's a lot to, and, you know, she's trying to get it all out. And, you know, you can't do it in our short segment.
It sounds like the Federal Express commercial. Remember that?
But, yeah. But, you know,